Hello, this is Reindeer's Bees, and today I'm going to talk about major honey producing plants in my area. So there are a few plants that every year they give me the honey that fills my honey supers, and they're really the main plants that I look to see where the flow is going to be for the entire year. If you're interested in me doing a similar video for some other regions of the country, I can do some research and make that happen. Comment down below if you're interested in that. So the most important plant for me, Dutch white clover. It's not even close. It's a great plant. So Dutch white clover, it's by far my most important plant. It blooms typically in late May or early June. And after I see this first few blossoms, about 7 to 10 days later, I'll see like a major honey flow. Like the bees are plugging out. They're so full of nectar from the clover. It's a legume, so it puts nitrogen back into the soil, so it's great for lawns. You know, if you decide to replant your lawn after the clover grows in, it should be better soil than when it originally grew in. Another great thing about clover is it is highly drought resistant, and not to mention that, it also, if you cut it, every time you cut it, it keeps growing back a flower over and over and over. So you know, that's why it's so great for lawns, really. Bees love it. They really love it. I love just walking out in June and seeing the bees all over the flowers, from flower to flower to flower. I followed some like as many as 30 flowers. They just keep going and going and going. It's just awesome time of year. It prefers a pH of 6 to 7, but in Maine, our pH of our soil is between 4.8 and 5.2. And it still grows here. So it's a pretty flexible plant in that too. I think it produces the most honey in the glacial soil belt in Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. I think you can get crazy amounts of clover honey here, but it's still pretty good even here in Maine where the soil's too acidic. It will, like I said, really get going in early June and it finishes about a month later in July. It blooms for the rest of the summer, but the bees stop getting nectar from it for whatever reason. I'm not really sure. Then when it comes to actual Dutch white clover honey, I think it's a very, very light honey. But what's interesting is I think it blends with my other plants. So my honey isn't really light, but it's also definitely not dark either. It's about a middle in the scale. But I think if you make pure clover honey, it would be very, very light. So my second plant, it's called bird's foot truffle. Shocker, it's invasive. It seems like all the plants the bees love are invasive. It's also a legume. It has very thick leaves and foliage, and it grows the best from like where I live, like on kind of hills, really clayey hills. It seems to take over there where no other plant can even grow, so I don't understand why that happens, but it does. And it doesn't really do much on the lawn, which is good because it's really, really thick. My dad said it's really hard to cut through with his mower because it's so thick. It prefers a pH of 6.2 to 6.5, but once again, soil is pretty high in pH and it's still not a huge issue here. I'm not really sure what type of honey it makes. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a darker honey, if it was pure. But since it's mixed with my honey from my clover, I think it kind of gets in the middle. These are my two main plants. It starts blooming a couple days after the Dutch white clover generally, so very late May or early June. And they're blooming at the same time. It's obviously a great nectar source because the bees go to the Dutch white clover and the bird's foot truffle at the same time. So both are valuable plants to the bees. I'm not sure how much pollen they get off the other two plants. I should have looked that up, but I think they do get some pollen from them. My third main honey plant, it isn't my main flow, but it really kicks off the honey season here. Some years dandelions can do really well and maybe get a flow going, but most years the first major flow of the year is Japanese honeysuckle. So it's invasive, another shocker. It is like kind of a bushy plant. It slowly, it grows relatively slowly. And the birds spread it everywhere. The bees love it so much, they pollinate all the flowers, and then it produces a lot of small red berries, and the birds will poof them all over the woods. And what I find is the honeysuckle grows really well in direct sunlight, So it's taken over the brook behind my house, right next to the brook where there's full sunlight, because the trees, aren't growing in the brook, so it, allows some sunlight to get into the understory. They are taking it over down there. So they're very invasive. So I wouldn't suggest you plant one in your yard because they'll be everywhere soon enough. It blooms in late May and gets going pretty quickly. As soon as I see the blooms, I generally see a lot of nectar in the hives. And they build up more on this nectar, so I'm not really sure. Not as much of it gets into the honey super, so I'm not really sure what color it is. But I don't know. If anyone knows that, comment down below what Japanese honeysuckle, what color of honey it makes. I'd be really interested to know. It blooms for a few weeks, and I think it's really good till that Dutch white clover really kicks in early June. So maybe 2 or 3 weeks of bloom. And like I said, I've got a video on my Instagram. The bees just love it. I mean, there's an entire bush full of them humming. They love it a lot. It prefers soil from 5.5 to 8 pH, but once again, it's an invasive plant, so it's very adapting to higher pH soils. So those are my 3 main float plants. If you're interested in more educational content just like this, go down below, hit that subscribe button, and like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.